Hello and welcome to this special broadcast. PM Modi at East Asia Summit. On a day, the 19th East Asia Summit takes place in Vientiane in Laos PDR. The 19th East Asia Summit begins shortly there. Well, the summit process had started in 2005 and the summit today comprises 18 participating countries, and that includes the 10 ASEAN countries and 8 others including India. We'll get you the live coverage and analysis with experts and a correspondent who's closely tracking PM Modi's participation in the summit in Vientiane. I'm Munmun Bhattacharya. With me is my colleague Mark Lip.
Namaskar, Munmun. And the East Asia Summit is a process where ASEAN's strategic role in managing great power politics in East Asia comes into focus, because the ASEAN-led institutions have developed over time certain institutional strategies to manage tensions in the South China Sea. The idea of the ASEAN centrality, on the whole of Asia-Pacific, now Indo-Pacific as well, is one of the cornerstones of the ASEAN Charter. So we'll unpack the relevance of the context of the statements being made at the 19th East Asia Summit as we go along.
Absolutely. So let's get started. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi is on a two-day visit to Laos, and PM Modi will be participating in the East Asia Summit today.
That's right. The 19th East Asia Summit is being hosted by Laos PDR as the current chair of ASEAN. Now, the East Asia Summit, it encompasses the 10 ASEAN countries and the 8 partners, which are Australia, China, India, Japan, the Republic of Korea, New Zealand, Russia, the United States and Timor-Leste as an observer.
Prime Minister Modi will also hold bilateral meetings with a few leaders on the sidelines of the summit, besides a bilateral meeting with the Prime Minister of Laos, Sonexay Siphandone. PM Modi is also expected to call on the President of Laos PDR, Thongloun Sisoulith.
Well, as Munmun was saying, the East Asia Summit has existed since 2005, and its purpose is to build strategic trust in the region, promote peace and stability, and to ensure prosperity.
Right. Prime Minister Modi announced the Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative at the 14th East Asia Summit in 2019, and since then, India has built convergences with the ASEAN's own outlook for the Indo-Pacific and is working closely with ASEAN countries on this.
Now, 3 ASEAN countries, they are Indonesia, Thailand and Singapore, and 3 East Asia partners, the United States, Australia and Japan, have been partners in the IPOI.
The Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative. Let's get perspective now. Joining us now is Ambassador Anil Wadhwa, a former Indian ambassador. Ambassador Wadhwa, such a pleasure to have you on DD India. For starters, what do you expect from the East Asia Summit? Also, if you could tell our viewers how they should distinguish between expectations from the India-ASEAN Summit, which is concluded now and a joint statement is out, and the East Asia Summit. What will be the difference essentially between the two?
So I think as far as the ASEAN Summit is concerned, we can expect discussion on 3 main topics. One is, of course, the ongoing issue in Myanmar and political stability there, where ASEAN is most concerned about what's going to happen in future. Also, in respect of the South China Sea, there's an ongoing issue as far as China is concerned with 5 of the ASEAN member states. And lately, of course, there's been an increase in tensions with Philippines and also Indonesia. Here again, the ASEAN is going to push for an early conclusion of the code of conduct for the South China Sea, because that will mean that they will be able to create some sort of a stability in that relationship and come to some sort of understanding with China on that issue. However, because of the presence of outside powers in the region now, the issue has become much more complicated, and countries like India and United States feel that they should have a role as well, and accommodating them seems to be an issue as far as the Chinese are concerned. The third issue is about the integration within ASEAN and the effect that the ongoing conflicts are having on the economies of Southeast Asia and ASEAN in particular. And therefore, we will have definitely references in almost all the statements that will be made to the situation in Gaza, as also the conflict in the Middle East, because oil supplies depend a lot on how the situation, the stability in the Middle East, whether it's there or not in the future. And therefore, most of the ASEAN states are going to push for some sort of understanding on that issue. Beyond that, I think East Asia Summit is not an implementing body, so it cannot actually implement any decisions which will be undertaken. But the fact that many of these statements are made in the spirit of the times makes it that much more important. As far as India and ASEAN are concerned, yesterday we saw a statement by Prime Minister Modi in which he reaffirmed India's commitment to the centrality of ASEAN and his commitment to also implement the 15-point program that he had outlined last year. This year, 2025, is going to be the India-ASEAN tourism year, and so we will see a lot of exchanges between the two countries. Also, we need to have an implementation of the digital roadmap for which a grant was announced by Prime Minister Modi at the last India-ASEAN summit meeting.
Right.
And the modalities of that still have to be worked out, but we will see a further elaboration of that in this year and the coming years.
We also have with us Mr. Atul Aneja, expert on foreign affairs. He's joining us here in the studio. Mr. Aneja, thanks very much for being with us. Let me ask you, straight off the bat, how has ASEAN been able to navigate this great power politics? I mean, after, let's say, 2011, the US also joined the East Asia Summit process. I mean, there's China already there. So how do you view this?
I think they have, Mark, navigated it pretty well. And the reason for that is that the ASEAN builds on a consensus-based approach. You see, they're not in a confrontational mode. So this Asian wisdom, if you can see, or your approach for dialogue and diplomacy rather than use of force, they don't look at the world necessarily in hard geopolitical terms, but quietly work towards building consensus. So if you really look at the flip side, there has not been an active conflict over there. It has been contained precisely because of this consensus-based approach. And I think the ASEAN is naturally inclined towards geoeconomics rather than geopolitics,
Right.
which allows them to look at, you can do two things together. For example, I heard Malaysian Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim recently, and he said, okay, we have a problem in the South China Sea on the maritime issue with China. So we will retain that, but that does not mean we will not talk to China on other issues. So this is a kind of a more inclusive approach where you can compartmentalize your interests. There is a problem, but that problem will not be allowed to overshadow areas of possible collaboration and cooperation. I think that comes through in that Asian wisdom which I see in ASEAN. Doesn't look very spectacular, looks as if they're not taking positions, but in the end, I think it's working.
Okay, let's get an update now from our reporter who is there in Vientiane, the capital of Laos PDR, where the East Asia Summit, the 19th edition of which is taking place. Well, Meghna, good morning to you. What can we expect today, and do we expect the East Asia Summit to have more strategic content geopolitically than the India-ASEAN Summit that we saw?
Definitely, Munmun, what we can expect of the East Asia Summit. Yesterday we saw the outcome of the ASEAN-India Summit. We did see there was mention about the South China Sea and how the rule of law should be, obeyed. And obviously, we know there is a friction, in the South China Sea. But having said that, the East Asia Summit might just dwell upon more issues. We can say more geopolitical issues for that matter. Maybe we can see conversations obviously around Myanmar. We can see conversations around conflict in Israel, or the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Those might just also emerge. The global issues also might emerge. But having said that, the East Asia Summit may also directly, talk about climate resilience, disaster resilience, terrorism, cyber security, and more for that matter. Because when we are talking about, more stakeholders in the East Asia Summit, which are not just the ASEAN countries. We obviously know that there is Japan, there is US, there's Australia. So, when these countries also come together, we definitely see that ASEAN is also one of the things that is in the Quad also gives a lot of importance to. So, this is something that would be discussed. And besides that, obviously, trade is something, like our experts said, geoeconomics is something that will definitely be discussed on the table. And how the trade can be enhanced. We will definitely be able to see that Prime Minister Narendra Modi would also push maybe for a greater economic or greater bilateral trade with the countries of the ASEAN, and for that matter the whole of the East Asia region. Besides that, also today, Prime Minister Narendra Modi will be holding a bilateral meeting with the Prime Minister of Laos PDR. He will also call on the President of Laos PDR. Those engagements are also on the cards. He will also be holding bilateral meeting with the other Southeast Asian leaders. So that is something that is on the cards for today, besides the East Asia Summit. But as far as it looks that today, in some time from now, the summit is about to begin, it will definitely be dwelling more on geopolitical issues, as well as aspects of supply chains, aspects of the South China Sea, the situation in Myanmar, and these things for that matter.
Meghna, the focus also is also on China, and the Chinese premier is there. So, what kind of, let's say, press coverage has the Chinese received? What statements have they been making?
So we'll have to see what is the kind of statement that they would be making today first, because we'll have to see on the platform of the East Asia Summit what do they have to say. When we are already discussing the South China Sea, it will be important to see what they have to say, because as we said that there is friction in terms of the South China Sea, maybe be it Philippines, be it other countries of the Southeast Asia. So that is something that we will be looking forward to see what are the statements that they would be making in terms of how there will be rule of law maintained, or that how South China Sea will be able to abide by the UNCLOS.
Right, Meghna, we'll keep coming back to you for more updates. You're telling us that the 19th East Asia Summit is going to begin anytime now in the capital of Laos PDR. Prime Minister Narendra Modi is expected to speak there. Right. He will definitely be participating, as he's one of the 18 leaders who will be present there at the summit. Well, taking off from where we had left, Mr. Aneja, on the conflicts in the South China Sea, and there's a mention of that in the joint statement in the India-ASEAN context as well. But it mentions the need for having a code of conduct for various parties in South China Sea. There's already a declaration that we have. But in the various meetings that China has been holding with various Southeast Asian countries, no code of conduct for implementation has been finalized as yet. And there's dragging of feet. India has said it would want that to be expedited and done with. Do you think that this will definitely be mentioned in any joint statement at the end of the East Asia Summit? And do you expect conversation around this to figure at the summit?
Moon, two things. Regarding the conversation on the code of conduct, definitely. Because you're not talking of solving the issue in terms of your differences on the maritime boundaries. You're talking of a confidence building measure. You're talking of having a conflict free relationship till the time you resolve the maritime issue. So code of conduct is very, very important. And that is something on which the ASEAN and the Chinese have been talking for a long time. Whether it has reached a level of finality, I'm not sure whether we have still reached that.
No, we haven't, because it says the India-ASEAN joint statement says there should be one.
There should be. It should be expedited.
Yeah.
So that is a reasonable kind of a result that India would expect and many other countries would expect. Whether it will find in the joint statement, because joint statements, Munmun, are usually consensus based. So if China is not ready right now to put it on paper that we have arrived at a certain solution, I doubt, in the language will be critical. I mean, it can be left open-ended, which will be comfortable to both sides, but I don't expect a very definitive position on code of conduct in the joint statement that will come, but I may be wrong on this. Right. But this is an interesting part where you are trying to find a midway between the solution of a problem to a tension-ridden situation as it exists.
Let's turn to Ambassador Anil Wadhwa. Ambassador Wadhwa, how effective have these institutions that have come out of negotiations with ASEAN been in sort of creating regional stability? I mean, is also Quad one of these institutions, one would cast, because I mean all the Quad members are also part of these outreach countries.
So first of all, let's separate the two, because ASEAN is its own institutions. Quad is a recent grouping of states which has come about in the reaction to what the Chinese policies have been in the region. Talking about ASEAN first, of course, it's a important forum where countries express what they feel like with regard to the ongoing issues, as well as in the context of ADMM plus, for instance, also on the security issues. So we were just talking about the code of conduct in the South China Sea, which has been under negotiation now since 2003. Obviously, we need to come to a point where there is a meeting of minds as far as ASEAN and China are concerned. The need of the code of conduct on an immediate basis, and secondly on what to do with the rest of the countries and how to treat them in any agreement that they reach with China as far as their presence in the region is concerned. Clearly, at the time that we talk about, I mean that is today, we have a situation where the ASEAN is trying to balance its own interests with those of other countries which are major players in the region, like United States and China. So therefore, we can't expect a consensus on this issue at the moment. And there will be a need which will be felt to restate the position that there should be an early conclusion of the code of conduct. And I think that we left at that. Besides, the situation in Myanmar is very pressing, as I already told you. So that is something that the chairman's statement, which will be issued. And by the way, we don't have a joint statement in East Asia Summit. It's a chairman's statement, which is drafted after taking a consensus of all the countries who participate in this meeting. And that's the sense of the meeting. And therefore, that gives you a result which everybody is sort of satisfied with, the bare minimum that can be achieved at the end of this meeting. And coming back to the Quad, of course, because of the aggressive policies of China, the four countries have revived this grouping in 2017, which is now gone up to the summit level, by the way, which we all know. And at this summit, they have come up with a number of initiatives. The Quad has now gone into several issues, and there are a number of working groups, which is all a response to what is happening in the region. But the most important part of this is the freedom of navigation issue, for which the Quad has expanded this range and the scope of the Malabar exercises, because they want interoperability and a sort of deterrence to what China's aggressive actions are in the South China Sea and the East China Sea. That's where we are at the moment. It's just an informal grouping of countries. The Quad itself has acknowledged the centrality of the ASEAN so that they can work with ASEAN and, in the future in all these fields and deliver what they call, Quad as being a force for the common good. And to deliver something which is of necessity to the countries of ASEAN.
Right, Mr. Aneja, taking forward the point that he had made that there are challenges in reaching a consensus when it comes to, like he said, the chairman's statement here in the East Asia Summit. And that is, I thought, also reflective in what we saw in 2019 when India had proposed the IPOI, the Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative, because if you look at the participation, there are 6 countries, whereas there are 18 in East Asia Summit. So there are 3 ASEAN countries in it, and there are 3 non-ASEAN countries in it, which are part of East Asia Summit, and obviously China doesn't figure here. Now, this is a non-treaty based and voluntary initiative, remains flexible. The focus is again on a free, open and rules-based Indo-Pacific. So it gives us a sense of how difficult it is to have consensus on this issue, because it's so, after all, there's so much strife in the South China Sea, isn't it?
Absolutely, Munmun. So, you see this polarization caused essentially by the clash of the Americans and the Chinese. That's
what Mark was referring to initially.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Those are the 2 pillars now. In between comes the ASEAN. Countries like India comes into this. And so, at the moment, the relationship between the Chinese and the Americans is so polarized that it's difficult to come on any common platform, or countries like ASEAN to come on any common platform or build a consensus on it. But that again explains the reason why there's a need for a constant engagement, so that this polarization between these 2 giants doesn't spill into open conflict, because the region is so very, very important. So yes, you do find the difficulty in finding a common ground, but yet you do see a situation where the countries which will be sort of impacted by the clash between these 2 major countries, major powers, at least they manage a relationship in the region, or a situation in the region which does not lead to actual conflict. So that's where we are.
Right.
Your point, building a consensus, extremely difficult at this time, but to be engaged in a dialogue, exceptionally important as well, because you never know at some point when you have created certain opportunities what might click at what time. So this is a time for a preparation in a way for a solution at a later time. Important to stay engaged in a dialogue.
But Mr. Aneja, at a time like this, when the US is going in for an election, the government is lame duck at the current time. What can they really offer? Is this an opportunity perhaps for China to exert undue influence?
No, I don't think so, Mark, that the elections are going to impact, because there is a certain consensus of the US position which remains, which will remain a constant even during the time when they go into election mode. So they don't switch off on their key geostrategic issues. So that particular situation will remain. So I don't see that creating any special opening for China to sort of bulldoze its way into a language or into a situation where it has a leg up on the Americans in this region. So I don't think that's really going to happen.
Yes, Ambassador, coming to you now. If you recall, last time around, just ahead of the G20 summit on the 9th and 10th of September, there was this East Asia summit in Jakarta, and Prime Minister Narendra Modi made time for it. He went there, he participated in the meetings, and he was back here, and all the ASEAN countries were also participating in the summit in some capacity. So does that show the kind of importance that India has been placing over the years, including in the last decade particularly, on its Act East policy and engagement with this region?
Yes, if you look at Prime Minister Modi's record, he's attended almost all of these meetings since he came into power in 2014, and except 2 of them, because that was disrupted because of COVID, where he could not attend. But other than that, he's been quite keen to have a presence in these meetings. He also did a summit meeting with the leaders of the ASEAN in India. And it is during his watch that the relationship has gone up to the strategic partnership relationship. Why is this? Because Prime Minister Modi is very keen to see the linkages, especially in connectivity, being developed so that it can increase trade and tourism. And frankly, it's a big solution if it can happen as far as the northeast states of India are concerned. Now, that is under a bit of jeopardy because of the situation which is currently on in Myanmar because of lack of stability there. Therefore, the trilateral highway connecting India through Myanmar and Thailand is on hold. Similarly, although the Sitwe port has been built, the Kaladan multimodal project cannot be fully completed and implemented because of the situation in Myanmar. But that does not mean that the efforts are not on meanwhile to see whether the infrastructure for eventual opening of this connectivity corridor is in place. And that's why Prime Minister Modi is keen that there should be as much diversified engagement with the ASEAN as possible. One area where India has not done so well in terms of intensification of its efforts, of course, is in the trade and investment side, where India is out of the RCEP agreement. And now we are seeing a review of the FTA with the ASEAN, which is ongoing at the moment. It is only because this relationship with ASEAN is on a firm footing that the ASEAN has actually agreed to do a time-bound review of the free trade agreement, which will happen by 2025. So there are 8 working groups working on that at the moment. And India hopes that through that, the Indian exporters could also export more to these countries. And secondly, the investment flows could be diversified. Right now, they're concentrated more vis-a-vis Singapore. Most of the investment into India from ASEAN is via Singapore, which needs to be diversified to other countries. And the third issue is, of course, is to have direct linkages with all the ASEAN countries. Right now, we have 7 countries which have direct links. 3 of them don't have. One of them, Brunei, is going to open up very shortly. But then we'll have 2 more which are left to cover. And as I said, when we have the India-ASEAN tourism year in 2025, then India hopes to do much more by way of connectivity in the digital side, the people-to-people side, and also physical connectivity.
Right. So as we await, inputs from the East Asia Summit, let's go back to Thursday, where Prime Minister had taken part in the ASEAN Summit, where he presented a 10-point plan for boosting tourism and green energy, among other areas of cooperation. DD India's Meghna Dev reports now from the Laos capital, Vientiane.
Calling the upcoming century the Asian century, Prime Minister Modi highlighted the fintech sector gaining ground in ASEAN countries, joint defense exercises, increase in direct flight connectivity, and scholarships to ASEAN students. The joint statement highlighted the support for full and effective implementation of the Declaration on the Conduct of the Parties in South China Sea and the early conclusion of an effective and substantive Code of Conduct in the South China Sea.
हम एक दूसरे के पड़ोसी हैं, ग्लोबल साउथ के साथी सदस्य हैं और विश्व में तेज गति से ग्रो करने वाला क्षेत्र है। हम शांतिप्रिय देश हैं, एक दूसरे की राष्ट्रीय अखंडता और संप्रभुता का सम्मान करते हैं और अपने युवाओं के उज्जवल भविष्य के प्रति हम कमिटेड हैं। मेरा मानना है कि 21वीं सदी एशियन सेंचुरी भारत और आसियान देशों की सेंचुरी है। आज जब विश्व के कई हिस्सों में संघर्ष और तनाव की स्थिति है, तब भारत और आसियान की मित्रता, समन्वय, संवाद और सहयोग बहुत ही महत्वपूर्ण है।
मोदी जी आपका लाओस से हार्दिक स्वागत है। On his arrival, Prime Minister Narendra Modi received a grand community reception where Lao children chanted Sanskrit shlokas and Lao women performed Bihu as well as greeted Prime Minister Modi in Hindi.
Very happy to perform. So it was not so tough and a little bit tough, but because of Modi, we can do anything and anytime. It was so happy moment for us. Also for the team, they're very happy to perform in front of. And when Modi ji said like once more, it's like I got the world,
Prime Minister Narendra Modi witnessed an episode of Lao Ramayan called Phalak Phalam. The Archaeological Survey of India, involved in restoring the Vathpu temple, presented the progress of work done to Prime Minister Modi. He also participated in a blessing ceremony by senior Buddhist monks in Central Buddhist Fellowship Organizations of Lao PDR. Meghna Dev's report for DD India.
Prime Minister Modi also held bilateral talks. He held talks with Japan's new Prime Minister Ishiba Shigeru on the sidelines of the ASEAN-India summit in Laos.
Indeed, and the Prime Minister congratulated Prime Minister Ishiba on his new responsibility. He wished him success in leading Japan to greater heights.
PM said that India will continue to accord the highest priority to its ties with Japan.
And the two leaders reaffirmed their commitment to further strengthening the India-Japan Special Strategic and Global Partnership through enhanced cooperation in a wide range of areas, which include trade and investment.
They said that India and Japan are indispensable partners for a peaceful, safe and prosperous Indo-Pacific region. The two leaders renewed their commitment to working together to achieve this goal.
And Prime Minister Modi also met his New Zealand counterpart, Christopher Luxon, on the sidelines of the ASEAN-India summit in Vientiane.
It was the first meeting between the two leaders. The two prime ministers discussed about ways to strengthen bilateral cooperation across a range of areas, including trade and investment, defense, security, space and people-to-people ties.
The Prime Minister invited Luxon to visit India.
Now coming to the 10-point plan that was enunciated by Prime Minister Narendra Modi, he announced this plan for boosting India's ties with ASEAN.
Yes, the first point is celebrating 2025 as the ASEAN-India Year of Tourism, for which India would make available $5 million towards the joint activities.
The second point being celebrating a decade of India's Act East policy by holding people-centric activities such as a youth summit, startup festival, hackathon, music festival, ASEAN-India network of think tanks and the Delhi Dialogue.
And the third point is to organize an ASEAN-India Women Scientist Conclave under the ASEAN-India Science and Technology Development Fund.
The fourth point is doubling the number of scholarships at Nalanda University and provision of new scholarships for ASEAN students at agricultural universities in India.
And the fifth is reviving the ASEAN-India Trade in Goods Agreement by 2025.
The sixth point is enhancing disaster resilience, for which India would make available $5 million.
7. Initiating a new health minister's track towards building health resilience.
8. Initiating a regular mechanism of ASEAN-India cyber policy dialogue towards strengthening digital and cyber resilience.
The 9th point is a workshop on green hydrogen.
And last but not the least, India invited the ASEAN leaders to join a Plant a Tree for Mother campaign towards building climate resilience. So that's the 10-point plan that was announced by Prime Minister Narendra Modi at the India-ASEAN summit.
We're going to take a short break now, and when we return, we'll continue to discuss and look at events that are taking place in Vientiane. Do stay with us. Geopolitics and trade deals. Economic challenges amid development. Hard work and the path to prosperity. It's the economy always. Between walkers, money is what money does and says,
supply creates its own demand, between the bulls pulls and bears tears. When supply chains globalization and India rises to the podium. We'll get you centered with the economic brief at 8 p.m. every Thursday on DD India.
Always welcoming. The vibe of Punjab is larger than life. Warm up to grandeur that's beyond compare. And history that's dotted with tales of bravery. Smiling soul of India, where music, art, cuisine and culture comes together to create an unforgettable impression. Punjab is all set to win your hearts with its unique and colorful extravaganza.
Complex issues, hidden agendas, twists and turns, strategic games. We think all dots are linked, we just need to connect them. Join me every week as I connect the dots to unravel hidden designs in statecraft, mysteries and decode issues that matter to you. Watch Connecting the Dots with me at these times on DD India. Welcome back. You're watching a special broadcast on Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit to Vientiane, the capital of Laos PDR, for the ASEAN-India summit, which took place yesterday, and now the 19th East Asia summit.
Well, yes, Prime Minister Narendra Modi is in Laos and he will be attending the East Asia Summit in a short while from now. But let's take a look at the highlights from the Prime Minister's first day in Laos PDR, where the Prime Minister met world leaders. He saw a special Ramayan program and interacted, as always, with the Indian community.
So, we will now discuss the 10-point proposal that was announced by Prime Minister Narendra Modi at the India-ASEAN summit in Laos PDR yesterday. And Atul Aneja, foreign affairs expert, continues to be with us here in the studio. Ambassador Anil Wadhwa is joining us virtually, but I'll come to you, Mr. Aneja. On the 10-point proposal, let's begin with the first one, which is to have India-ASEAN Year of Tourism in 2025, and India will be committing $5 million against this cause. How
Yes.
significant? Yeah.
Important because it's part of attempt to have forge greater people-to-people ties. So we have to look at it in the context of enhancing that. And I think tourism is a very, very important element of it. I think there is an underlying theme here of India's geocultural connectivity with ASEAN, which is reflected in, your reporter had just said that even the temple of, this is Pot Phun temple being restored in Laos. If you recall, Indian Archaeological Survey had also restored the Angkor Wat temple in Cambodia at one time. So there's a very strong geocultural connection between the two. So I think a lot of this tourism related initiative, it could go into developing this Buddhist circuit which we have, which will connect the ASEAN sites and of course sites in India, which is of course starting actually in Nepal, Lumbini, and then we go to Sarnath and Bodh Gaya. So you create a full Buddhist circuit as part of the tourism package. So there's a great potential when it comes to tourism, and a spiritual cultural connectivity between India and ASEAN gets further enhanced and reinforced through this initiative.
Ambassador Wadhwa, to what extent is celebrating this 10 years of the Act East policy also going to help in promoting people-to-people connectivity?
So I think the emphasis of the Act East policy now obviously is to diversify the kind of activities that we do with ASEAN, which eventually leads to much more connect with the people, and at the same time reaching out to different sections of the population, right? Starting from the students, the women, the entrepreneurs, and also the businessmen. As part of that, you have a youth summit which is being planned. You also have a hackathon, and then you have 4 or 5 other fields where, like the Delhi Dialogue, where academics come together. 4 or 5 fields that have been chosen very carefully, which have been successful over the years. It's not as if it's being held for the first time, but the fact that they've been all put together this time with a focus means that India wants to consolidate the gains that have happened in these fields. And that's very important because unless you do that, the continuous flow of activities between India and ASEAN will eventually slow down because we don't have the kind of vibrancy by way of trade and investments that the Chinese, for example, have with the region. And also we need to connect much more as far as our Northeast is concerned with the countries of ASEAN. The first point about tourism, it's important because we've been trying to create an infrastructure for Buddhist tourism for a long time. Setting aside $5 million for the tourism year means that all those sites are going to benefit from the infusion of this capital. And it eventually will be something that can be utilized in the coming year.
Yes, taking that point further of connecting people across sectors, be it artists, youth, entrepreneurs, think tanks, a music festival, youth summit, hackathon, startup festival. So do you think that this also is something that can be leveraged for the comprehensive strategic partnership as well between India and ASEAN?
Yes, Munmun, I do think that's the spirit of it. The main thing is people-to-people connectivity, and there are layers of that. And I think one focal point here is youth connectivity. We are looking forward now, connecting the next generation together. And there you see the kind of areas. You are going to have some scholarships for the Nalanda University for students there. Agriculture is another major area of requirement in ASEAN countries, because ASEAN is unevenly developed if you really look at it. If you look at a Singapore, when you look at a Cambodia, each has different requirements. So agriculture is an important part of economies of certain countries in the ASEAN. So opening scholarships for young people in agriculture universities is an important part of connecting that layer of youth. Then you have other advanced areas as well. Startups will come into it. I thought the women element of it,
Yes.
women scientists coming together. Now that's another important element of connecting women entrepreneurs or and your
Scientists,
technocrats,
yeah.
scientists together is part of this whole package of people-to-people connectivity, which is getting traction in various forms in that. And also I find, which will come later, is that the 10 point is quite future oriented. You talk of green hydrogen, new economy. I suspect semiconductors is part of it in the background, but we'll come to that later.
The
But
supply chain,
supply
for sure.
chains.
Yeah.
So you're looking
Ambassador
forward.
Ambassador Wadhwa, about the Indian Women Scientist Conclave, ASEAN-India Women Scientist Conclave, how does it fit in really with the ASEAN-India Science and Technology Development Fund? I mean, the relationship between the two.
Yes, I exactly had that in mind before you asked question, because the Science and Technology Fund has done pretty well by way of its implementation and the connect between institutions, and they've also chosen the subjects quite carefully. Right now, the emphasis is on vaccine development and its distribution. But we have to go forward from there and look at new areas of cooperation. Now, as far as connecting the women scientists is concerned, that will create its own synergies, because we know that in India and in ASEAN there are a number of important women scientists who have done good and pioneering work in recent years. Many of them have been acknowledged to do that. And creating their linkage itself will generate something for the future, which will be very good for both India and for ASEAN. We're going away from the run-of-the-mill kind of exchanges. It's a very innovative idea. And let's see how it goes in future. I feel that it will be a big success.
Yes. On the Nalanda University, you were referring to that, Mr. Aneja, that the decision has been taken to have the number of master scholarships for students from ASEAN countries at the newly established Nalanda University increased twofold. So there will be twice the number now. And a new scholarship scheme for ASEAN students at the agricultural universities will also be launched starting this year. The revival of the Nalanda University, can it really be a game changer in bringing these countries, all the ASEAN countries and India, even closer in the spiritual context?
Absolutely. I mentioned the geocultural domain, and this is precisely what I had in mind. Because Nalanda existed, it is again a part of revival of a relationship. And Nalanda was an international university in its time, and there were scholars coming from the region, in fact from China as well. We had the Xuanzang experience as well with Nalanda. So reviving Nalanda in a modern avatar is something which has been very, very important for this new layer of cultural connectivity. And when you come to scholarships, it means connecting the youth in this larger ambit of geocultural commonalities. So I think it's exceptionally important that this has happened. And this is for a purpose, and there's a story behind it. There's a backstory behind this as to why this particular, first of all, the initiative of reviving Nalanda and offering more scholarships for young people in the ASEAN countries to come.
So
This
what is the
element.
backstory?
Story, yes.
No, the backstory is just Nalanda.
Okay.
So,
but Nalanda, Mr. Aneja, is ancient in that sense.
Yeah.
I mean, and we are also trying to revive the ancient roots and go deep into the Buddhist teachings of the past. But we're living also in Industry 4.0. So can we, blend the two?
Absolutely. There's no contradiction between that. Only thing is that when you develop, you go into Industry 4.0, you're also reviving your ancient civilizational. In India, we call ourselves a civilizational state, but we call ourselves a modern civilizational state, where you are rooted in your past, but you're looking into the future. So your identity becomes reinforced very strongly with these initiatives, but you are not going back into the past. That is your inspiration, that is your identity, and you in the global system, you are one of the poles now in a multipolar. So your civilizational state is part of that. So you take it forward to Industry 4.0, you will go into semiconductors, you will go into cyber, for example, which is one of the platforms which is part of the 10-point program. You will go into green hydrogen now, which is again new energy form. So there is absolutely no contradiction. In fact, when Prime Minister says that it's going to be the Asian century, he precisely means that there has been a Western century, for 400 years, but this Asian century is coming up. But the Asian century has to have its own identity. And that's where you have to go into your civilizational roots, but look forward and ahead.
Yes. On to the next point now, the fifth point, in which is the ASEAN-India Trade and Goods Agreement and completing the review by 2025. You had mentioned, Ambassador, that. And the focus now being on strengthening and securing, ensuring resilient and reliable supply chain. So do you think that, like Mark said, Industry 4.0, and there's so much focus on futuristic sectors, on blockchain technology, on AI, on quantum computing, robotics, etc., all that could also become part of this exercise going forward, if not now, then after the review?
Definitely. I think the immediate concern as far as the India-ASEAN FTA is concerned is that it has not worked to the satisfaction of Indian exporters. And because it was it's called the first generation FTAs that we signed with any other country. And therefore, what we negotiated was an FTA which could be implemented together across the ASEAN states. So the benefits that ASEAN gets from India is only, as far as India is concerned, just one country. But the implementation of this FTA across 10 countries of the ASEAN is a little difficult to manage because they have their own peculiar set of regulations which need to be streamlined to bring it on a common platform. Because otherwise it creates what our business calls non-tariff barriers and hindrances to trade. Which is very difficult to break through. Some countries might, for example, preserve their IT industry. Some others might look at preserving one or two particular commodities, especially related to agriculture. So we need a platform across the board where there's a level playing field as far as India is concerned for our exports into ASEAN without any hindrances. The second issue we need to look at is also the rules of origin issue. And that's one of the main reasons why India is kept away from RCEP, where China is using its supply chain connections with the region to export to India, which actually is classified as an ASEAN export and therefore enjoys the trade benefits which it should not enjoy. So therefore, it's a very big need to streamline the rules of origin, provisions in this FTA, and the list goes on. So once we have this review completed in 2025, we will then be able to also go into the linkages that we can make in terms of our own supply needs for our own manufacturing industries. And meanwhile, in India, we have started, as you know, the PLI scheme, which has gone into 14 sectors. So there is obviously a need for components, which are available, some of them which are available with the ASEAN countries. And this review will definitely help to streamline those imports as well. So overall, I think it's a very good decision that both sides have reached, at least to make it into a time-bound framework so that it doesn't drag on in the future without any end in sight. 2025 is the deadline, and after that, we'll be able to look forward to much more investments which will flow from this streamlined trade agreement.
Ambassador Wadhwa, 2025 is just a few months away, but also the issue is, of a green transition that's across the world. I mean, there are so many issues now about products that are taxed or tariffs are put because of the methods involved in production, which are increasing, let's say, the dirty component. In this context, I mean, a lot of trade agreements are being affected because of countries now wanting to put tariffs on methods of production, let's say steel, for instance. These are the kind of concerns that probably will need to be ironed out as well.
you're absolutely right, and that's one of the concerns that India is now taking up while the negotiations, for example, with the European Union are on, where there is a CBAM which has been imposed, which is proposed to be imposed, and our industry, although they're preparing for that transition, but India would not like the taxation on these products to be made by the country where the products are being exported, but to be done in the home country, which is India, so that the revenue goes to the Indian government and not to the other countries concerned. So that's the main sticking point here. But otherwise, I think India is quite okay with the transition which will happen, because in any case, it's also something which is happening in any case in our own industry as far as the transition to a green economy is concerned, and our eventual goal of net zero by 2070 is concerned.
Right. Thank you so much, Ambassador Wadhwa, for joining us. Your inputs were really insightful, and have a good day. So we'll take a break at this point in time,
Yes.
Mark, but a special coverage on Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit to Laos PDR now for the 19th East Asia Summit will continue after a short break. Stay tuned.
Extreme weather events are going to get more frequent and intense. What can we do? Here are some ideas.
In each of the grid, we installed rain gauges, and we identified local people from the villages, and these people were given training how to measure rainfall. And every day, these farmers used to give rainfall data into a WhatsApp group that we had created called Wayanad Weather Forecast.
Sweden started very early to cut out fossil fuels from our energy mix. So that also shows that big, bold changes are possible.
There are 5 to 6 families who have joined us on this journey towards self-sufficiency. We also exchange products and goods.
If we use cork instead of these materials, which are not renewable, cork is, we are decreasing several orders of magnitude.
Complex issues, hidden agendas, twists and turns, strategic games. We think all dots are linked. We just need to connect them. Join me every week as I connect the dots to unravel hidden designs in statecraft, mysteries, and decode issues that matter to you. Watch Connecting the Dots with me at these times on DD India. Welcome back. You're watching a special broadcast on Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit to Laos PDR for the 19th East Asia Summit. There are in all 18 members of the East Asia Summit, and they include the 10 ASEAN member states and 8 other countries, including India. And yesterday, in fact, we saw the India-ASEAN Summit took place, and Prime Minister Narendra Modi did enunciate his 10-point proposal. And Prime Minister will also be holding bilateral talks with a few leaders on the sidelines of the 19th East Asia Summit, besides, of course, a bilateral meeting with Laos Prime Minister Sonsai Difondon.
Yes, the Prime Minister is also expected to call on the President of the Lao PDR, Thongloun Sisolut. This is also going to happen later today. First, of course, our eyes will be on the East Asia Summit that is due in a short while from now.
And we are discussing the various points of the 10-point proposal enunciated by Prime Minister Narendra Modi at the ASEAN-India Summit in Vientiane, Lao PDR yesterday. And we've discussed quite a few points, but there are many more that still remain. Well, Atul Aneja ji continues to be with us. He's a foreign affairs expert. Mr. Aneja, on disaster resilience, we've seen that Prime Minister did commit $5 million for the ASEAN-India Fund. And there's so much happening between India's NDMA and the ASEAN counterpart there. Considering how the weather has been, there have been far too many freak weather events. There's a Hurricane Milton there in the United States, and these hurricanes, etc., they keep happening. We know how the basis of the Quad was the tsunami in the Indian Ocean region in 2004, and all of the Quad members are part of East Asia Summit. So how significant is the kind of single-minded focus that the Prime Minister has had on helping various countries as a first responder and otherwise in such situations?
Absolutely, Monmon. So, you have to create a disaster resilient infrastructure. The reason why, one is of course climate change issues which are coming in, but traditionally if you look at ASEAN, and it's been subject to typhoons very frequently, and they come and cause enormous amount of devastation. We ourselves suffer from cyclones. So it is important that communities which are close to the shores, fishermen, other communities, they are protected at this time, and for that you need a resilient and cost-effective infrastructure which may use local production. For example, bamboo is part of that. Bamboo rattan. I remember attending a conference in China, of all places, where there was a discussion on resilient infrastructure, looking at these local cheap materials which will be sort of resistant to the kind of weather phenomena which takes place. Then you need also to do a little bit on the ecology side to recreate those particular, there are certain kind of plants and trees which are important to resist this kind of which sort of form a shield between the population centers and when the full flow of a disaster comes into play. So those are other areas in which we need to do on the ecological side ways of making a resilient infrastructure. It's a holistic package which is required on it, and I'm glad that the Prime Minister has taken a special initiative on this particular. And you mentioned about India's traditional role in HADR, humanitarian assistance and disaster relief, and we have been first responders all over. So this is the human side of it, the human-centric approach which India follows. I think this focus on disaster and resilient infrastructure is very much part of that human-centric approach which the Prime Minister has been talking about, and most of the new international forums, whether it's the G20 or others like G7 and other forums, that this is a human-centric approach is the one which you require, and disaster resistance infrastructure is a part of that thematic line.
Indeed, the human-centric approach is part of India's nature as well. But the importance is also a realistic approach at the time when we are going through such. I mean, we are seeing it for ourselves. The kind of rapid changes in environmental phenomena. So in this context, do you see, because both these areas, India for one, and ASEAN, as the Prime Minister was saying, we are the fastest growing areas economically, also have young populations. These are places that are going to define what the Asian century is. So in this context, I mean, the disaster resistant infrastructure should be up front and priority.
Absolutely. This has to be a top priority because you see, this is the engine of growth for the global economy, this entire region. And I think we have rightly identified this. Our concept of neighborhood has changed. Earlier, neighborhood used to mean, South Asia, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh. Now, neighborhood has been broadened, and ASEAN is very much part of that neighborhood. And
extended neighborhood in a sense.
Now we call it neighborhood. If I recall, even the Prime Minister's speech yesterday mentioned it as neighborhood.
Yes, he spoke
and the
of
word
neighbors.
Extended is dropped because we have historical
They're all attached by land to India's northeast.
Absolutely. Myanmar, one talks about, you have, from Manipur, you have a border with Myanmar, and then you get into Thailand from there. So this is very much part of our neighborhood, part of the Asian century. So therefore, looking after the people of this region becomes that much more urgent and important as we integrate closely with the region. So disaster infrastructure would be one. I suppose health is another point which will come up, which is again extremely important, where India has a comparative advantage over many other countries.
Yes, so taking that forward, the decision that has been taken on the health track, we know that pandemic preparedness has in the past been an issue of concern, and India, of course, has been the vaccine manufacturer for the world. So going forward, do you expect India to continue in the role that we've seen it show or perform in a sense during the pandemic and otherwise?
That's the turning point, really, the pandemic, because that's where we really see ourselves, and the world sees us as the pharmacy of the world for one. And second thing is vaccines, which you mentioned, Manu. So this is going to be, I think this is a field which are going to expand. And if you recall, just a while ago when we were talking to Ambassador Wadhwa, he mentioned that when science and technology, the first item which has been picked up is vaccines. And there's a reason for that, because India is now expanding itself as healing the world, to put it another way. And this collaboration with ASEAN is going to be an extremely important one. Therefore, the health track now is one where I think we're going to see a lot of traction.
Right. Also, would we could also look at the health track from the point of view of India's traditional medicines. I mean, not because even during the pandemic, this is what came to light. I mean, a lot of these medicines seem to have given tremendous relief, and people started looking at them seriously.
Sure, Mark. See, we look at the other side, the DPI, digital public infrastructure, but which is something which can go into the global south especially, and there are countries of the global south within ASEAN itself. And similarly, we can see
traditional
medicine. The Ayush program, which India has successfully done, whether that can be replicated in other ASEAN economies. I think that is something which we need to take. Ayurveda, and I think traditional medicine has also been developed in many of these ASEAN countries. So Ayush and a collaboration on the other side, I think traditional medicine is another area. Wellness centers which we open, we have opened also hospitals which is called, I don't think that's an appropriate word, this medical tourism which we call.
Yes.
I think that's something again which we provide quality health at a much lower price than others. So that can also be a part of the India-ASEAN collaboration on the health track.
Yes, taking that point further, joining us now is Ambassador S.R. Tayal, former Indian ambassador. Such a pleasure, sir, to have you on the special broadcast. We are discussing the various points of the 10-point proposal that was enunciated by Prime Minister Narendra Modi at the India-ASEAN summit yesterday. Of course, we are now counting down to the East Asia summit. We are expecting live inputs from there anytime. But Ambassador, we are discussing about the health track, for instance. There's a focus on health resilience, and there's a mention of cancer care as well, because the 10-point proposal says that there'll be an invitation given to 2 experts from each ASEAN country to attend India's National Cancer Grid Vishwam conference that is held every year. Now, you would remember just some weeks back, the Quad Summit had taken place, and there was focus on the cancer moonshot program there with focus on cervical cancer. So, these diseases have always been very challenging. Very many Nobel Prize winners have won for coming up with various innovative solutions to this. How do you look at the focus on cancer care, particularly from the Quad now to ASEAN?
The medical science has made tremendous progress in the centuries, over the centuries and decades and years, but cancer remains now an unconquered area. And again, it is not essential that only the new discoveries, new chemicals and new procedures come only from the West. What India is trying to do is that there is enough talent, enough innovation, and enough thinking in ASEAN countries, in East Asia, in India, which can be harnessed to look for new solutions. And of course, segments have been identified in cervical cancer. India has taken the lead, and vaccines, etc., are being made and given to our population. So there are different kinds of cancers that are some of them treatable, some of them not till now. But if India works together with the medical researchers, scientists, practitioners in ASEAN countries, it is 1 and 1, 11. And that is, in fact, if you look at all the 10 points, it is very future oriented. And it is very problem oriented. What are the problems being faced by ASEAN countries, people of ASEAN and India, where India, tremendous amount of research is going on in India, in all the cutting edge fields, whether in AI, whether in IT, whether in medicine. Agriculture has also been, and new scholarships on agriculture. The International Rice Research Institute is in Manila. They have done tremendous work in India in wheat and pulses. A lot of work is going on. Then India's mission now in palm oil, that India wants to have more production because we import a lot of oil, edible oil. And there is scope for cooperation. Malaysian Prime Minister was recently in India. And that was also talked about. So it is coming down to the grassroots level. I think what these 10 points and the elaboration reflects is that under the overall paradigm, the overall umbrella, the overall structures of cooperation have been established, and over the years a lot of work has been done. Now, as is our Prime Minister's policy and nature, he wants to come to action, real action. And then you grind down and then drill down and come to specific areas where there is need, where there is possibility of synergy, and where India has something to offer, both by way of research, pharmaceuticals, and also by way of policy. Our entire Ayush program, as was mentioned, and the way medical care is being expanded to all above 70 years of age free. Just compare it with, one should not name one or two Western countries which are very advanced and do not offer this kind of facilities. So it is a policy direction also.
Ambassador Tayal, I'd like to talk about that point a little bit because it's important from at least the way I see it. The cost-effective nature of making healthcare viable. After all, the problems that the pandemic created were that there's a likelihood of so many kinds of diseases that can spring upon us. And if the West was supposed to be, driving healthcare at their exorbitant costs, we would probably end up with half the world being unable to afford most of the medical facilities. And here is where India's initiative matters in this new health track, where we're going to look at things at a much more reasonable and affordable manner, in a much more making it accessible to people.
That is absolutely right. There are different models of healthcare available in the world, and many of them are coming under tremendous pressure because longevity is increasing. including in India. Most of the world, longevity is increasing. Old age, number of people of old age are increasing. And earlier, in our older generation, parents' generation, most of the deaths used to take place with heart attack, etc. That has been totally restricted. So, but that adds to the cost of healthcare. And so there are two issues: that the cost should be affordable, and accessibility. Accessibility across ages, across rural and urban areas, and also that everybody should be entitled to some basic healthcare and also advanced healthcare. So basic healthcare already in India, it is provided free in our government system, primary healthcare right up to tertiary medical hospitals. But the number of beds available, etc., there's a lot of work going on. So policy should be clear. I think there is total clarity in our Prime Minister's mind that what should be the objective of healthcare in India: affordable and accessible, and now group-wise, women, children, the different vaccines, fortified food is being given. Prevention becomes a very, very important factor in total healthcare. There, the quality of life, yoga, that kind of Ayurveda, where the body's capacity to resist infection, to fight infection, and to generally be better healthcare. I think India has excellent models to offer to the rest of the world. And India and our Prime Minister is leading by example. International Yoga Day, and how yogas, it was known, it was very well known all over. But the way it has expanded after International Yoga Day was instituted by under the directions of our Prime Minister by the United Nations. So there are several factors by which total health care can be provided, better health care can be provided from prevention, vaccination, better health, better quality of life, better food, better nourishment. Our children are being given fortified rice.
Right.
So there is a total package where India's policy is very, very clear. There is a lot of work which has already been done, but as our Prime Minister said, a lot of work still being done, needs to be done. But there should be focus, and all of this experience, India is ready and willing to share with our partners in the entire global south, and of course, with all the members of ASEAN.
Right, and there is some update that's coming in. The spokesperson from the China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs has spoken, and very important points being made by him. You could just bear with me and listen to this carefully. He said that with the joint effort of China and ASEAN countries, the situation in the South China Sea is generally stable. He also said that China remains committed to settling maritime differences with countries concerned through dialogue and consultation on the basis of respecting historical facts, which is important, and we'll tell you why, and international law. Again, a very important point. Meanwhile, China firmly opposes any infringement activities and provocations and firmly safeguards its territorial sovereignty and maritime rights and interests. It also says that China will continue to work with ASEAN countries to fully and effectively implement the declaration on the conduct of parties in South China Sea, actively advance consultations of the Code of Conduct in the South China Sea, and jointly make South China Sea a sea of peace, friendship and cooperation. What do you make, Mr. Aneja, of this? Is this any sort of a sentiment of accommodation or any sort of expression of accommodation, or do you think this is just diplomatese, nothing more should be read into it?
I'm a little curious about the use of some phraseology here.
Yes, please, go ahead.
And well, it's not completely departed from its earlier position, which meant that the whole of South China Sea actually belongs to
And just if
China.
I could intervene here, pull aside at least has taken place between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and US Secretary of State Antony Blinken. We'll be showing those photographs to you in just a bit. Please continue.
Yeah, so Munmun, the Chinese statement says that their approach to settling with a dialogue. First of all, need for a dialogue agreed, which was on expected lines, but respecting historical facts. Now, when you look at historical facts, what are the historical facts from the Chinese perspective? Which is completely inflexible approach. I mean, it doesn't accept there is a dispute actually with maritime dispute when it comes to islands of the South China Sea. But the second point I find it interesting, historical facts and international law. So is there an attempt for some flexibility in bridging? Because what does international law? International law is UNCLOS.
Yeah.
So are you willing to look at a midway position where you will tweak your historical...
No, currently China does not abide by UNCLOS. And as far as historical facts are concerned, if my memory is serving me right, then in the arbitration ruling of 2016 by the Court of Arbitration, the award had gone in favor of the Philippines. And there were historical bases that was a mention in that arbitration ruling. I think it said that the historical basis cannot be taken into consideration. If my memory serves me right, that's what the arbitration ruling had said. So now now it's saying respecting historical facts, which could be an argument that it might be seeing in its favor, but also talking of international law, which until now it hasn't abided by UNCLOS.
That's true. So, I would look at it with skepticism.
Yes, I think
the formulation, but I would want that countries of the region start exploring this. Okay, if you talk about UNCLOS, China is, by the way, signatory to UNCLOS.
Yes.
But they have put in, when you sign UNCLOS, you don't do it blanketly. You can put caveats into it. So there's a caveats to every clause of UNCLOS, which sort of makes it. It's not blanketly saying it respects UNCLOS, though the UNCLOS treaty allows that. But now when they talk about international law, I think it's worth exploring with skepticism as to whether it's going to be the status quo position or there could be a slight budging which could take place from the Chinese side, given the pressure it is facing. Hard to say. I'll be skeptical, but at least one eye open.
But it's the interpretation of what is historical facts.
What is historical facts?
What is historical facts in their opinion? I mean, their historical facts, as you know, date back to many centuries.
Many centuries.
Yeah, and they will claim something which happened in the 15th century or something like that.
If not earlier.
Yeah, if not earlier. So, I mean...
So that is a problem.
Yeah,
UNCLOS.
Okay.
Difficult.
But let's take this forward. This is an interesting development that has just happened. So, Ambassador, coming to you, what do you make of this statement by the spokesperson from China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, references made to a consultation on the basis of respecting historical facts and international law, also a reference made on effectively implementing the declaration on the conduct of parties in the South China Sea, actively advancing consultations of the code of conduct in the South China Sea. That's what every ASEAN country has been telling China, that let's come to a code of conduct and let's implement it. But for some reason or another, on some excuse or another, a code of conduct hasn't been finalized as yet.
Both with you, Anuja ji. I agree with both with you and Anuja ji. It is just diplomacies, and it is just to fudge the East Asia Summit is today, and I think very strong statement will come from Secretary of State Blinken. We will see what our Prime Minister has to say on this matter. Maybe Philippines also may make some strong statements. So this is a statement to blunt whatever criticism comes from the leaders in the East Asia Summit statements. And Laos, of course, is the host, so we do not expect any criticism, frankly, but let me not prejudge that, let me change. But China's whole policy, if you see, particularly since 2012, from President Xi Jinping came to power, is to change the facts on the ground. Of course, on historical, whatever is their interpretation of history, 9-dash line and all of that, the whole world knows what the exaggerated and absolutely illegal approach of China is, what it claims to be its own maritime boundary, and no country in the world recognizes that. But China knows this, and very surreptitiously, and they have changed the facts on the ground. 3 islands have already been fortified very, very strongly. Now they have a Ream base has been established, a naval base in Cambodia. Cambodia says it is not a permanent base, but the facts on the ground are different. Chinese aircraft carriers can also, there are reports and photographs are there, which is for the whole world to see how in the last 4 or 5 years an entire new dock has been created, which can accommodate even aircraft carriers of China. So I'm sure all the leaders of ASEAN and the world are clever. They are not, will they not be taken in at all by this statement of a Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs. It is their job to issue such statements. But the countries, the leaders of East Asia, of the world, rest of the world, should fully understand what is going on. Relentless expansionist policies of China, whether it is South China Sea, whether it is in different ways, it is now trying to come to Indian Ocean. And of course, on our border, we are watching that. And well, as Anejaji said, it's interesting that they have used the word international law because they have flouted it totally. In the UNCLOS in the Philippines, their arbitration award has held that the 9-dash line has no basis in law, international law, or any law. So they have totally flouted and not agreed to the UNCLOS arbitration award, which went into favor of Philippines. And in contrast, let me just say, like if with Bangladesh, we had a maritime boundary issue which went to arbitration, and whatever was the judgment, in fact, it was our claim was not accepted. But India accepted that award and implemented that, whatever was the decision of the arbitration. China says it never accepted arbitration, but that is just sophistry. China has no claim, and the way it is pressurizing Philippines now, which the whole world is watching, again changing the facts on the ground. There is a certain ship there where the Philippines, a small detachment is there on a abandoned ship, and the supplies to that are now being restricted and impeded by China because it wants Philippines to leave that place. So China is now disturbing the status quo in entire world. It is disturbing the status quo in East Asia, the prosperity of whole of Asia, particularly of East Asia. Post-Vietnam War was based on peace and tranquility in the region. And one country, and that is China, is trying to disturb peace and tranquility in the region by questioning the status quo, by pushing the envelope, by expansionist policies. And the first line, of course, is the South China Sea. All the countries of ASEAN are not very strong, but they are small as compared to China. So China very cleverly says that we will discuss all these issues bilaterally. And within ASEAN, the code of conduct, the whole world knows, all the ASEAN members know how China has stalled any decision or any movement in the finalization of the code of conduct. And it has put so many conditions that any foreign investment there will be with the approval of all the countries, and any foreign navy visiting will have. So they have put such conditions which no sovereign country can accept. So their intention is not honest. And now ASEAN as a group, how they deal with it when the world, and we also need to recognize that within ASEAN does not work on the basis of voting. It works on the basis of consensus. That means all the 10, well, Myanmar is a little out present, but the 9 countries must be together in putting any common position on the code of conduct in South China Sea to China. But we all know, the world knows that Cambodia, and perhaps, again, I will be guarded in my words, perhaps also have some other views. So it is a very difficult issue. But we should not be, the world should not be, and the ASEAN leaders should not be taken at all by this sweet state or some compromising or some kind of a willingness to negotiate kind of statement which has come from Chinese Foreign Ministry, because their track record says that their intentions are different.
Indeed, and Ambassador Tayal did mention the Secretary of State of the United States, Anthony Blinken, and on the sidelines of the East Asia Summit, in fact, Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Secretary of State Anthony Blinken have met. PM Modi extended condolences on the loss of lives because of Hurricane Milton. Earlier on Thursday, Prime Minister Modi, in fact, yes, Prime Minister has met Secretary of State Anthony Blinken and conveyed his condolences we did talk about that as well, the effects of climate change really hitting the United States quite badly. Two hurricanes, one after the other, Hurricane Helene, and then followed by Hurricane Milton.
Yes. So these are stills of a handshake between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and US Secretary of State Anthony Blinken, and there you see
with Anthony Albanese.
And yes, so
this
the
is yesterday,
Prime Minister meeting a whole lot of leaders within the ASEAN framework and under the East Asia Summit. So it's been 2 days of hectic diplomatic engagements for Prime Minister Narendra Modi, and Anthony Blinken, in fact, is representing the United States at the East Asia Summit. And we know that the US is heading into elections now. November 5 is the US presidential election. So a lot of focus of Joe Biden as well as those in the Republican Party on that. But so US Secretary of State Anthony Blinken representing the United States at the East Asia Summit, and Prime Minister Narendra Modi holding bilateral meetings with a whole lot of leaders under the India-ASEAN framework as well as the East Asia Summit framework. And like Mark was saying, the focus was on disaster resilience and on combating climate change as well, and mitigating the impacts of climate change, because he had given his condolences, he had extended his condolences on the loss of lives due to Hurricane Milton that has battered the United States coast. And of course, this handshake comes just weeks after Prime Minister Narendra Modi was in the United States, where he had met US President Joe Biden in his hometown. It was the first time that President Biden had hosted world leaders in his hometown, and very special moments we saw from that meeting of the Quad leaders at his residence, at the residence of Joe Biden. And there was an announcement also that was made on supply chain resilience between India and the United States. Besides, of course, a lot of the Quad initiatives were also announced. There were already very many working groups under the Quad framework, but it was decided that the collaboration will be extended into newer domains. So it was a very successful and productive visit of the Prime Minister to the United States recently. He had also addressed the Summit of the Future, where the Pact for the Future was adopted by consensus by the majority of UN member states. So now we see this handshake between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and US Secretary of State Anthony Blinken on the sidelines of the 19th East Asia Summit. India, of course, is a member state of the 19th East Asia Summit, and in 2019, India did come up with the Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative with the focus on ensuring that international order and international law is followed in this part of the world, that is in the Indo-Pacific, which includes the South China Sea.
Right, indeed. Let's turn once again to our guests. Atul Aneja is with us, foreign affairs expert in the studio, and Ambassador S.R. Tayal, former senior diplomat, is also with us. Mr. Aneja, so the US, of course, came into this ASEAN Plus. It was 6, then it became 8, with the US also coming in 2011, I think. How has the US, changed things around once it joined the East Asia Summit process?
I think it's a very, very important input which has come, and you have a very solid counterweight to the Chinese now inside the East Asia Summit, with the US coming in. So it is sort of it balances the equation a bit. I would even say that it's a slight weightage, China loses some of its weightage in this with the coming of US in the East Asia Summit. So that's an important input which has come in.
Okay, and there's a statement that has come in from Antony Blinken speaking to Southeast Asian leaders gathered in Laos. This is what Antony Blinken said, and I quote, "We remain concerned about China's increasingly dangerous and unlawful actions on the South China and East China Seas, which have injured people, harmed vessels from ASEAN nations, and contradict commitments to peaceful resolution of disputes." So once again, the great power rivalry playing out in the South China Sea, in a sense, also the East China Sea, because there are conflicts there, which are maritime conflicts between India and Japan. Sorry, I beg your pardon, between China and Japan. And I'll come to Ambassador Tayal on this. Ambassador, some very, I would say, stringent words, for lack of a better word, being used by Antony Blinken in the context of China and the conflicts that we are seeing in the South China Sea and East China Sea in Laos. Ambassador, how do you see this?
This kind of statement was expected. Earlier, when President Duterte was the president of Philippines, that he tried his best to come to some kind of an arrangement with China so that the interests of Philippines are not harmed. But China continued to expand and restrict Philippines fishing, etc., in the Philippines exclusive economic zone and territory and waters. Now, the present President Junior Marcos, he has a different policy, and he has clearly said that Philippines may be small, but they will not give in, they will fight for their sovereignty. And as Secretary of State Blinken referred in the statement quoted by you, that there has been harm to people and property, there have been clashes, the boats have been rammed. One or two boats of Philippines have been rammed by the Chinese Coast Guard boats, and they have put water jets and all of that. So things are escalating in South China Sea, particularly between Philippines and China. The Chinese Coast Guards are becoming very aggressive.
And if I may intervene here, the United States has also deployed its missile system for the Philippines there.
See, Philippines is the security ally of United States. There is a formal treaty of defense.
Yes.
And statements have come from United States that all this area under dispute, if there is a clash between Philippines and the US, then US will come to Philippines defense. They have not said that this area in dispute in South China Sea between Philippines and China is outside the ambit of US-Philippines security alliance. So it is a very important issue for United States that it does not want to get dragged into a war with China. So it is giving a warning to China that please desist and don't push the issue so much that there is a confrontation. So it is very good that this clear message publicly has gone from Secretary of State Antony Blinken in East Asia Summit, which only remit the whole East Asia Summit format in 2004 was established to discuss such issues, not just economic issues, but strategic issues, because as we all know, in Asia, East Asia, there is no formal organization or where the leaders meet and discuss such issues. You know, in Africa, there is Africa Union, there is Caribbean, but in our East Asia, there is none. So it is very important that the top leadership of the 10 ASEAN countries, 9 let us say, Myanmar is out, and 6 other major countries, US, Russia, China, India, Japan, Australia are present in East Asia Summit. And a clear statement goes from United States warning of the dangers of these expansionist policies of China, which are disturbing the status quo and which can have very, very dangerous consequences, not only for this region, but for the whole world. So it is very significant, and China should take note of it that just that Philippines is a relatively weaker country, so it can push Philippines into some kind of a submission. And so it is the responsibility of the rest of ASEAN, friends of Philippines, United Nations, UNCLOS, the entire world to come openly, clearly, vocally to the assistance of Philippines. We will all recall that our Foreign Minister Dr. Jaishankar had visited the Philippines a few months back, and some very clear statements had come from him on this issue.
Right, and
Right.
visuals coming in of the various meetings that Prime Minister Narendra Modi is holding on the sidelines. We saw with the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken. We also saw a pull aside and talks on the sidelines of the East Asia Summit with Christopher Luxon. He is the Prime Minister of New Zealand. Well, the United States has been unscathing, right? And it's criticism of China in the South China Sea.
Strong
and
words.
yes,
They've used
very
strong
strong
words.
words it's used. It's condemned China's aggression in the South China Sea. Do you think this great power rivalry will only sharpen going forward? Ambassador.
Now, see, the days of wide diplomacy between China and the United States are perhaps over. And things, because earlier also certainly such statements were made, advice was given, consultations were done when China was making all kinds of new fortifications of these uninhabited islands in the South China Sea. And some clear, well, it is said reportedly that some guarantees were given by President Xi Jinping to President Obama that there will not be any militarization of all those areas, but China went back and militarized. So now perhaps whether it is the over capacity of production manufacturing in China, which threatens the economies, employment, jobs, and manufacturing of all the countries of the world, whether it is European Union countries, whether it is United States, whether it is India or any other country. That is one part where now countries which earlier were a little guarded in speaking are coming out openly. European Union has imposed duties on electrical vehicles manufactured in China. United States has done the same. Canada has done the same. So earlier there were a little guarded response from many countries of the world on these very clear policies, economic as well as strategic, which harm the national interests of the whole, many countries, and also threaten the peace and tranquility of and economic security of a large number of countries. So the conversation has become more sharp and more vocal. And if one looks at, and in the United States, it is on both sides of the divide. The Republicans and Democrats on one issue, if they are together, and it is that China is an expansionist power. It needs to be contained. It needs to, and both in strategic terms in East Asia, and in economic terms, because the way its economy is going and expanding and manufacturing capacity is increasing, and hidden subsidies are being given to their manufacturers so that they outcompete the manufacturers of the rest of the world. They are totally misusing their membership of World Trade Organization. But the world is very conscious of these dangers which are emanating from China, both in the economic field and the strategic field. And again, one should also note, including from our country, that nobody wants any confrontation with China. And the dialogue, negotiations, discussions, that is the way forward. As our External Affairs Minister has also clearly said that the security, etc., border issues cannot be de-linked from the rest of the relationship. So earlier, so now the positions of different countries are becoming more clear, because the intention of China is not good. It is an expansionist power. It wants to be a unipolar power in East Asia. And the rest of the countries, important countries, major countries, have taken note of this unfortunate tendency and direction of China's foreign policy, strategic policy, military policy, naval, the way Chinese Navy is expanding.
Okay.
And they are responding to it in different ways.
Indeed. We are joined by Professor Swaran Singh from the School of International Studies at JNU. Thank you very much, Professor, for being with us. So we've been talking, as we know, about China and the East Asia Summit process. Has ASEAN-China dialogue sort of changed after this East Asia process started, where ASEAN started, dialoguing with 6 partners, then 8. Now it's become a large process. And how has it affected China's relationship in this grouping?
I think, Mark, clearly the expansion of ASEAN into East Asia Summit does help ASEAN countries because they have not been able to themselves collectively stand against China. China deals with ASEAN countries mostly in bilateral platforms. They have had one declaration on conduct in South China Sea, which sometimes there are questions whether it is being implemented in both in terms of word and spirit. They've also been negotiating something called Code of Conduct in South China Sea way back from 2002, formal negotiations from 2017, which is still to conclude in that sense. So the pace of collective ASEAN standing up to China has been really lukewarm, to put it politely. And in that sense, it is useful for ASEAN to have a much larger gathering of East Asian nations, 18 nations. And all 17 are definitely concerned with the way this unprecedented rise of China has resulted in kind of showcasing power projections. And I think most interesting, hopefully from the summit today, will be the speech from Ferdinand Marcos, the president of Philippines, who did mention very strongly his concerns of China's behavior in South China Sea, both in China-ASEAN summit and also in India-ASEAN summit. So whether he is going to take that forward to East Asia summit as well, so that could be an area of definitely concern, which will perhaps will not confine itself to indirect references of China, but make a direct mention of China, of course. Clearly United States is another country that is always concerned with China's expansion. In fact, 2018 Indo-Pacific strategy document of United States under President Trump had clearly mentioned that China doesn't only have intentions, it has today capacity to replace United States in Asia Pacific or Indo-Pacific region, and therefore concerned to bring partnerships with like-minded nations in the region and ensure free and open Indo-Pacific as the acronym has been since then. So I think China definitely is a concern for all 17, and of course they will not make direct mention of this. But the big elephant in the room will be definitely China, but there are going to be a lot of other issues. Myanmar will be definitely another major issue because for about 2+ years there is a 5-point program consensus of ASEAN, which has not moved any further. So nations would be willing to know where it is going. Indian Prime Minister, I am expecting to definitely make mention of issue of terrorism, but of course also make positive proposals for the whole context of resilience and connectivity. So health resilience, cyber security resilience, connectivity resilience, and of course disaster resilience and so on. Connectivity is another major area. I think there are a large number of countries which now have direct flights. I think if you add Brunei, then 8 of the 10. We are opening embassy in Litsay also, in East Timor as well, and that is also going to be added to connectivity. So I think it's going to be very interesting to watch what Indian Prime Minister is planning to bring to the table today. And more nations are getting excited to engage India because India is 8% growth rate is really attractive.
Yes.
and India is now expected to become third largest earlier than 2030. So, very different expectations, and therefore, I think very different possibilities of what India is going to bring to the table.
Professor, a supplementary question to what you were saying. You said that the ASEAN's response to China's belligerence has been lukewarm, perhaps because the word China hasn't been mentioned even in yesterday's joint statement of the India-ASEAN summit. And now we'll see what the chairman's summary has to say in the East Asia summit. But that's still, would you say, some voice against what we see in terms of bilateral meetings between China and various countries? Because, for instance, Brunei Darussalam has been a silent claimant to its maritime claims in the South China Sea. But when the Prime Minister went there in the joint statement, there were references to freedom of navigation, overflight, on clause, etc. So, would you say that ASEAN still is a platform where most of these countries have a voice, and East Asia Summit is one wherein China is also a member state. So, they are treading cautiously, but the spirit is the same, and the only exception perhaps is Mr. Marcos, who has bluntly put the challenge that China poses to Philippines' maritime claims.
Absolutely. Two things. One, most of multilateral meetings end up being collation of bilaterals. So therefore, what happens on the sidelines is often more interesting than what happens on the formal discussions. Second, I think it's also important to note what is done and said in indirect fashion, because nations do not want to really annoy each other because they have to work together. Except Marcos' speech, as you mentioned, which is of course expected because he's been pushed to the wall for almost 2 years now. And therefore, what is going to happen in indirect mentions, India-ASEAN summit you saw made mention of need to ensure that the declaration of conduct in South China Sea is implemented to the word and spirit, and also for early conclusion of code of conduct in South China Sea, which is originally started in 2002, but formal negotiation from 2017. So, India has also likewise with ASEAN indirectly made mention of things that clearly indicate to expectations being different from China. And of course, Indian Foreign Minister, when he was in Manila, made a clear mention India stands with the Philippines in terms of ensuring their safety, security, sovereignty.
And they also agreed with the 2016 Court of Arbitration ruling belatedly.
Indeed. So, India has over a period of time become more assertive. Yeah. It's being more assertive in terms of what India stands for. So, there are occasionally, for example, way back in 2015, the joint statement with President Obama had said that we want to ensure peace and security and sovereignty in South China Sea. Beijing didn't like it at that time. So, India increasingly is becoming assertive, but also driven by leverages that India now has because of growing economic heft in that sense. So, ASEAN nations from 1990s when India started engaging them had looked at India as a countervailing power to China. Only India wasn't willing to be, playing that role. Even India today also says we don't have to be either bandwagoning anyone or appearing to be as an alternative to anyone. India is too large to fit into those kind of templates. India stands for itself. India stands for what we want to contribute to our own peace and security and prosperity, and by extension prosperity of the rest of the region and world. In that
One
sense.
more supplementary, if you allow me, is whether you think there is any likelihood of other member states taking inspiration from Marcos's direct approach towards China, or will they continue to be more cagey and cautious? Maybe because we must acknowledge here that Philippines is a treaty partner of the United States. There's a missile system that the United States has deployed for Philippines, which may not be the case with other members of ASEAN or East Asia Summit, barring of course China. So, do you think others could go in that direction, or will they continue to be cautious?
Since no other ASEAN country has faced what Philippines has in terms of, crashing into each other's vessels and so on. So, the tone of President Ferdinand Marcos will definitely be different, and may
Japan
not be,
also has been quite upfront in the
but we have a new
East
Prime
Asia
Minister from
Summit,
Japan now.
yeah.
So, he's going to wait and watch things before he really takes on that kind of harsh tone in such meetings. I think Thailand could be another example. Thailand is showing interest to join BRICS in that sense. So it's member of ASEAN, it's a treaty partner also with the United States in that sense. So I don't think that tone is likely to be matched. In fact, even the President Marcos may tone down his speech in the East Asian summit. But the anxiety, I think, is definitely shared by several of these nations. And I think in bilaterals, some of these things will definitely come out.
Do we still have Ambassador Tayal with us? So let's turn to Ambassador Tayal once again. Ambassador, we seem to be looking at certain limitations then for ASEAN to try and maintain stability, regional stability, because even if it's 17 against 1 in terms of East Asia, China seems to be creating the nuisance. It has the capacity, as the Trump document seems to suggest, to continue to do that. So what are the limitations then of this process?
China is adopting a two-track strategy. One of dangling of economic carrots for all the ASEAN members. All China is their top trading partner. Many of them are part of the economic and manufacturing value chains which are established by Chinese companies. They supply to China. China is also investing a lot of money in many of ASEAN members under their BRI. China has studied very carefully how the Western powers colonized the entire world in the 17th and 18th century. They controlled foreign trade and they established maritime routes. No other country had that kind of, and then they fought among themselves. That is a separate issue. So China is going very systematically to have, through this BRI, control the maritime routes. So South China Sea, if it controls, it will control that. Indian Ocean, it will never be allowed to control. But now India and other countries will never allow it. But in other areas, in Kazakhstan and all that, the road network, up to Iran, their trains are going, up to Portugal, they are having their. So there is a plan. There is, and ASEAN, not only ASEAN countries, but even European Union, even we cannot detach ourselves from Chinese economy. Our trade is also increasing. There are some bitter facts which one has to face. So China, now again, ASEAN countries are small countries as related to China. China is an absolute behemoth as far as other countries are concerned. The only major militarily important ASEAN country which has again maritime disputes with China is Vietnam. Because land disputes, of course, we all remember 1979 war where China gave, and Vietnam gave a bloody nose to China on the land border, but land border has now been settled. And maritime also recently, the Vietnamese leadership was in China. So for their economic growth, many of these ASEAN countries look at China as a partner. And that is a reality which one has to deal with. And they are finding different ways there to deal with this expansionist policies of South China Sea. Philippines is coming in the direct line of fire of China, but other countries may sympathize with the Philippines privately, but publicly they will hesitate in criticizing China, because China is very vindictive, and any statement, any whiff of any opposition to China or by them will have immediate economic consequences. We recall how when THAAD was established in South Korea, THAAD batteries, then there was a boycott of Korean companies in China, and their LG group came under tremendous pressure. So, and so with Japan also. So all the countries have that limitation, and one should be mindful of those. And I, for one, would not expect our ASEAN friends to vocally and publicly criticize China in any such forum.
Right. I think we'll take a breather, but some interesting points being made on the limitations that the Southeast Asian countries particularly face in countering a very assertive and also expansionist China, considering their dependencies insofar as economy, trade in goods and services is concerned. We'll take a breather at this point in time, but a special broadcast on Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit to Laos PDR for the 19th East Asia Summit continues.